Welcome to the Hunt Backcountry Podcast. This is episode number 446. And today we get to share the story of a very special hunt. It's a once-in-a-lifetime bighorn sheep hunt in Idaho's Frank Church River of No Return wilderness. Our guest, Jason, had the tag and he hunted it with his wife, Alyssa. And it is a great story for a very special hunt. And as you will hear about, the experience certainly did not disappoint. We have some photos from this hunt as well as a full-length video that Jason and Alyssa put together, and you can check that out at the link in the show description. Also, in the show description, you'll find links to contact us if you have any questions, comments, or feedback for the show. We certainly appreciate you guys tuning in. Thank you for all the support. Let's go ahead and dive into today's episode. Well, Jason and Alyssa, welcome to the show. I'm really excited to chat with you guys. It's fun for me because I've seen you guys out hunting. You've been using our packs for years, so we just, I've seen field photos, we've exchanged emails, all that good stuff. But first time getting you on the podcast and talking more directly, and I'm excited to do that with you. But to start with, go ahead and give us a little bit of a introduction and background just for who you guys are, where you're from, just whatever you want to share to provide context for listeners.
Perfect. Well, first off, thanks for having us. This is super exciting for us to get to come on here after listening for years. But yeah, so I'm Jason. A little bit of background. I was raised hunting. It's my dad's passion. He actually chose a career of cement finishing so that he could set his own schedule and that he could hunt and stuff like that. So my brother and I, we were raised in the mountains basically. And raised in Oregon, did a lot of blacktail hunting growing up. And we would travel to Eastern Oregon for our family vacations every year and hunt over in that high desert country. So that holds a special place for me. But yeah, raised hunting. I was super blessed to meet Alyssa now about 5 or 6 years ago. And she's a big time hunter too. And so it's just become our passion that the two of us, we go out and hunt whenever we can. We shed hunt in the spring and scout in the summer and hunt in the fall. So it's just kind of our way of life, and we really enjoy doing it together. So I just feel super fortunate that it's just been a way of life for me since the time I was born.
And I'm Alyssa. And I was not raised in a hunting family. I was like pretty much the opposite. So, but got into it in high school and then just kind of grew from there, started bow hunting and really kind of dove deep into that, and then decided I needed a career that was somewhat flexible. So I ended up deciding to do taxidermy. Went to school in Idaho for that, and then ended up going and apprenticing for a couple really awesome taxidermists over in Colorado. And actually that's where I ended up meeting Jason. So even though we're both from Oregon, we didn't meet till I was in Idaho or Colorado. So, but it's been great. It's a lot of fun being able to both go hunt together, and our plans usually work out to where we can both go at the same time, and it's been awesome. We just got mules here a couple years ago, and so we've been training those. They're pretty green. We just bought young green mules, so they're finally coming around to where they can pack some meat and stuff. So that's been really fun too, kind of using them, working with them, and then seeing them, get to the point where we're actually able to use them in the mountains.
What was that connection in high school for you, Alyssa, to start hunting?
For some reason, I've always been really interested in it and just like self-sufficiency. And I ended up getting a 22 for my 16th birthday and would just go shoot out in the field all the time. Like that's all I wanted for my birthday was a gun, and that's the only gun my dad would allow me to have. And so ended up meeting some friends, and they were able to lend me a gun and got my first blacktail tag, and ended up getting a buck that season, and I was just hooked from there. So
That's cool. I gotta ask, the details of you guys meeting when you were in Colorado, that have anything to do with Jason, you killing something and going into the taxidermy shop, or was it not at all that?
No, that would have been a much more like cool fitting story. But ironically, we actually met on Instagram, and I don't even know how it started, but I saw on her little profile bio that she was from Oregon, and I was like, well, she's pretty good looking. So I DM'd her and I was like, hey, so I see you're from Oregon. I'm from Oregon too. And we started messaging back and forth and ended up just hitting it off. And it was just honestly just a humongous blessing because I was, I don't know, I was over 30 at the time and I was kind of set on, I was like, oh, I'll just be a, single guy. I'll go hunt a bunch and stuff. And it's honestly been a huge blessing. Now I still get to hunt a bunch, but I just get to do it with Alyssa instead of by myself. So it was kind of funny how it started, but man, what a huge blessing.
Well, I know you guys have done a ton of adventures today. We could talk about a lot of different things, but we did want to talk specifically about a special hunt you guys had this fall. And I know it's going to be a fun adventure to hear about. And Steve, a little bit near and dear to your heart, a Frank Church
Yeah.
sheep hunt.
I know I
Heck
listened
yeah.
to your podcast, Steve, beforehand and heard about you and Tyler struggling. And so that was kind of a reality check. Going into it, I was like, oh, I'm going to hunt hard. I'm fortunate to have a ton of time. Like there's no way I'll not kill a sheep, like I'll get it done. I'll be one of the ones. And then I listened to your podcast and I was like, oh man, if Steve and Tyler were struggling, I was like, maybe this isn't going to be so awkward.
Yeah. I don't think there's anything easy about going in there, that's for sure.
There was not, and I'm actually glad that it didn't work out the way I had it drawn up in my head because it was a lot more memorable adventure.
Yeah, cool. So had you, Jason, been consistently putting in for sheep each year as that trophy species, or have you bounced around with, the opportunity to apply for sheep versus goat versus moose there in Idaho?
Yeah, so people hate me for this, but it was my first time applying for sheep in Idaho. So I love muleys.
Nice.
So I generally tend to apply for deer and elk and antelope. So I
Yeah,
was like, oh, this year, like we have time. Like I said, we had sold our house down in Swan Valley and moved up to Chalice, and we had chosen to, invest a lot of time and effort into videoing our hunts and stuff. And so we had some time set aside this fall. So I was like, well, like if I'm going to draw a sheep tag, this would be the year to do it. So back in whenever February or whatever, I decided to apply for sheep for the first time and got really fortunate and drew the tag.
I mean, you apply knowing it can happen. Like you said, you had some logistics of, hey, it'd be a good year, I have time, but still, it's not like you apply and I don't know, what were your expectations on like, oh, this probably is not going to happen. It's a pipe dream, or did you? I don't know. It's just such a unique thing to apply for the first time and get it.
It was definitely, I did not think I would actually draw. So, yeah, I applied and I was like, well, we're super fortunate being in, Idaho. We have some cool general tags that we can go hunt and stuff. So it was like, even if we don't draw anything, it's still going to be a super fun fall. So I put in and we were just planning our general deer and elk hunts and stuff like that. And, man, then fast forward to May, we were over in the Black Hills riding our mules and got the email. I think it was in May. Got the email from Idaho Fish and Game that I drew the tag, and I couldn't believe it. I was sitting there with Alyssa, and opened up my email and saw that little green box that says, successful. I was like, holy smokes! Like it took for it to sink in. I told Alyssa first, and I was just totally in awe. Like I couldn't believe it. And then the next thing I was like, oh, I got to call my dad. He's going to be so excited. So I did not expect to draw it at all. And when I got that email, it was like definitely a moment that's burned into my memory is just opening that email for the first time. And then did the old like close out, open up my email again, close out, sign in again. It was still there. And I was like, all right, this is going to be sweet.
Oh, that's wild.
Yeah, it was pretty sweet. It was definitely memorable.
What was your thoughts, Alyssa? I mean, were you familiar with what that meant or what a sheep hunt in the Frank looked like? Was that something you had researched, anything like that?
Yeah, we'd both listened to your podcast and talking about sheep hunting and stuff. And I mean, I've seen videos and stuff, but I really didn't think I'd ever go on a sheep hunt just because it's pretty limited, especially growing up in Oregon. It takes so many points to ever be able to draw a sheep tag. And so that's not really something I thought I was be able to do. But when he first got the email, it was like, wait, what? Like, really? Because I'm the type of person that I never draw anything, and he ends up drawing quite a few things. And so it was just like, oh man, I didn't think this was going to be, a reality, like him putting in for that. So, um, But yeah, I was a little bit bummed. I'm like, oh man, I'm gonna miss archery elk. And because I just found a really good wallow last year that I wanted to sit on. And so all year I've been like planning to sit on this wallow like opening day. And so I was like, oh man, I'm not gonna be able to do that. And then it was like, okay, what do we need to prepare for? And we have pretty green mules. And at first we are thinking about taking the mules in there. So it was like just starting to think about all the logistics and like how is this gonna work out and all of that stuff. So for sure it was like we have a lot to figure out, but this is gonna be awesome. So
Yeah.
Yeah, it immediately went to logistics. It was like excitement and we couldn't believe it. And then it was like, ooh, all right, now that we got this tag, we want to, do it justice. So it was like, what's the next steps to get ready to give ourselves the best chance to enjoy this hunt? Because there's a lot of logistics going into that country.
hmm Yeah, I mean, finding out in May and then like season comes quick between just figuring out logistics, narrowing down areas, whether you're gonna scout, like thinking through all the like you guys, mules or not, and all that stuff. I mean, that the time goes by fast.
It really did. It went by super fast. It was, practicing with my rifle. I got a new scope, just for this hunt specifically. And so it was like kind of upgrading gear. We got our new exo packs and stuff. And so it's like, what gear do we need? What gear do we want? How are we going to get into this country? It's a ton of fun. And that's like a big part of the process that you really want to soak in is the preparation and scouting and stuff. But it did go by quickly. The season came fast.
What, how did you narrow things down? Did you do any summer scouting or much summer scouting? I mean, how familiar with you were you with, I guess to back up for listeners who may not be aware, like you do select a unit, you're selecting an area, so you know what your hunt area is, but still it's the frank, so much country, sheep aren't dense, like it's just a lot to begin to filter through and narrow down. So what did that look like for you preseason?
It was a lot. So I had never been in the unit and like set foot in the unit before scouting. So I chose the unit just by looking at maps online and Google Earth. And I actually chose that unit because I was like, it looks like we could probably get the mules into this country. And that ended up not happening. It wasn't very feasible to get the mules in there just because of water and where the sheep are and trying to take care of mules at camp and stuff like that. It ended up not being we didn't take the mules, but that was why I chose it. Just it looked like cool country to spend time in, and it looked like we could get the mules in there. But then I had to wait till July when snow melted off enough that I could actually get in there, set foot in the unit, and start scouting. So yeah, to answer your question, I was super fortunate to take 3 scouting trips in there, and spent the scouting trips I did alone. And the first one, I was there like 3 days. Then I was only in there 2 days on the second one. And then the third one, we actually just started. Alyssa went with me on that one actually, and we started packing our stuff in because I had spotted rams on the second trip in, and we kind of knew where we were going to go. So we actually took a load of gear in there prior to season, then came back out, met up with my dad, and went in for the hunt.
What gear were you packing in?
With my dad going, what is dad, 67 now, I
yeah,
think.
he turned 67 while we're up there in sheep camp. So
Yeah.
kind of fun.
So my dad was
That's
67. We it was super important to us to get like to experience that country and a sheep hunt with my dad. He's never drawn. He's lived in Oregon most of his life and just never was the lucky
mhm.
one to draw a sheep tag. And so that was part of the logistics was like, all right, is this country that my dad can get into? He's tough and in good shape and, passionate about hunting. He's pretty gritty. So it was like, if there was a way, he would go in there. And so that was part of the logistics. And then to help him get in there, we wanted his pack to be in like the 25 to 30 pound range on the way in. So we took in actually our tent, sleeping bags, and a bunch of food that first trip on season open, I
Okay.
think August 30th, and we went in the 25th and dropped off just hung bags of food that like most of the way in there and our tent and stuff like that.
Nice.
Yeah.
That first trip, uh, setting foot in the unit, you're solo, obviously excited, but I guess, what was your experience and thoughts like getting into the unit, getting into country? It sounds like you didn't find rams on the first trip. I'm just curious kind of how it went, if there's any takeaways from the first scouting trip, or just what your mindset was either going into it or coming out of that specific first experience.
Yeah, my goal the first trip was just to lay eyes on the country, see it in real life, see how steep it really is, and see how the trail system was. Just see like logistically, can you go from, point A to point B, and is it going to take 1 day or is it going to take 3 hours or whatever, just to kind of get a realistic expectation of the country. And I was really fortunate. We actually bought a mule from a guy who had the tag last year. So he had really good information for me, and he was super helpful, really willing to share what he learned about that country. So that was a huge part of, my success on the hunt eventually. But so I had some spots marked on the map, but the main goal of the first trip was get in there, see the trail system, see how long it takes to travel, and then hopefully maybe find some sheep. Obviously, I was really excited to look for sheep, but that wasn't the main goal of that first trip in there.
Yeah.
It's a pretty big investment to get into that country. And so, yeah, I just wanted to get in there, see the country, hopefully find some sheep. And yeah, I ended up seeing a band of ewes and lambs, and there was like a 2-year-old ram in there that was the third day of scouting on that first trip. And I've never been so excited to see ewes and lambs, man. It was when it was super hot, and like it was mid-July basically, and it was just so hot, and I was struggling, and you're trying to ration water, so I was kind of dehydrated, and I by myself, and so you get kind of discouraged after glassing for hours and hours by yourself, and just there's not even deer in a lot of that country that we were in, and you're just like glassing just bare hillsides, and so I was so fired up. I spotted that you and Lamb running around in the rocks, and I was like fist pumping by myself because it was just so exciting to like see sheep in a unit that I had to tag in. It was pretty exciting, but it was still like talking to the biologist and stuff. It's like if you're seeing ewes and lambs, you're probably in the wrong spot for rams. So it was still it was a little bit like helpful, but it was mostly just exciting to see sheep in a unit that I was gonna have a tag for.
There's times in the Frank Corps I think you just get excited to see any sign of life.
Oh, dude. Yeah, you guys have spent a lot of time in there doing death hikes and stuff. It's so surprising because that country looks like you should be seeing like giant bucks in there and stuff. And it's pretty desolate. It's like there's not a lot of life in there, which is really interesting. And I'm not really sure why that's the case. But yeah, if you see movement, it's time to get excited, like when you're glassing.
Yeah, I ran into a guy, actually a couple of older guys that had the tag when I had it in like the 90s, and they were super curious to hear what I saw, because the one guy was like, "Oh, there'd be bucks on this hillside, and this whole canyon was chock full of elk, and they were bugling all September when I was in there hunting." And I was like, "Man, what?" When I reported back to them, they were pretty depressed about it, because it's like there's just nothing lives there anymore. I saw like one elk my entire hunt.
Yep.
And just a couple deer. I mean, it was pretty sad.
That's crazy. That's super interesting that back in the day there were animals in there because it just looks
Right.
so. I don't understand why there's not. So that's interesting that there used to be.
Yeah, I think wolves, loss of habitat from fires, and then over hunting. I think it's kind of all three of those things.
That's
But yeah,
interesting. Yeah. Huh.
So you said that first trip that was mid-July?
Yeah, that was mid-July. Basically, as soon as like the snow melted that I could get into that country. So it was
Yeah.
early to mid-July.
Nice. And then when was that second trip? It sounds like you found some rams.
Yeah, man, that was exciting. I went back. It was, I think, like August 1st. I went back for my second trip in there after coming out, pouring over maps again, kind of being like, well, the Rams are probably a little higher than those ewes and lambs. And so picked a spot on the map and hiked in there, went a long ways on the trail, and then cut off the trail and went up this kind of gnarly ridge system, and just took a bivy sack, and you got to pack water up there and stuff. And so it's a pretty good investment to get into like where you think there's rams. It's kind of hard, at least it was for me, and the shape that I'm in, to like change areas. So I kind of picked a spot, and I was committed to go in there. I had 3 nights worth of gear, so it was going to be a relatively quick trip. And yeah, went in that second trip, climbed up there, and didn't see anything the first day, and so my excitement started to wane a little bit, just, hours of glassing, not seeing anything, covering quite a bit of country, only probably hiking about 2 miles, but just glassing a ton of country. Once I got to my camp, I only hiked about 2 miles. And yeah, just didn't see anything that first day. Second day got up and it was actually socked in and raining in August, which it was like, felt like about the only day it rained up there. So I was feeling bad for myself sitting in the fog. I was like, why has it got to be foggy now? And so I ended up hiking out a different ridge system, didn't glass anything. And I don't know why I was feeling bad for myself. It's pretty special just to get to be in that country. So there's no reason to be like down really, but I was just like, I hadn't seen a ram yet and I was feeling a little down and walked back to camp. And I got back to my camp about hour and a half before dark and I was making a mountain house and I kind of felt like just sitting in camp and eating my mountain house, but I was like, that's stupid. I hiked all the way in here. So I'm gonna go back over this other little ridge that was only about a 30-minute walk from my camp and glass this like pretty tight small basin that had some water in it. And I was like, well, I'm here, so I'm gonna take my mountain house. I'm gonna go over there. I'm gonna eat it, and I'm gonna glass till dark. And so I get my mountain house, walk around the ridge, and plop down, and immediately there's a ram like 400 yards away. I started glassing. I couldn't see it with my naked eye even that close. It was just they blend in pretty good. And so when you spot them with your binos at 12 power at 450 yards, and it's like a nice mature ram, it's just my heart literally like skipped a beat. I was so excited. I was like, I don't know if I've ever been that excited when, I didn't have a tag yet while I was hunting. It was just, yeah, got over there and spotted a ram, and then it was like, there's another ram, another ram, another ram, and it was a band of 9 rams, and for me, there were 3 shooters in there. I mean, some people are probably more selective than me, but I just wanted a ram that was mature, like that looked like a nice, pretty ram. And so I wasn't going to be super picky. Obviously, the bigger, the better. But it was for me, there were 3 shooters in that band of 9 rams, and I was fired up. They walked around all over the hill. They bedded down. They were like raking bushes with their horns and stuff. And so I got to just totally soak in the experience of spotting those first rams while I was eating my mountain house right before dark, and I was fired up. I was so excited when I spotted those guys over there.
That's awesome.
Yeah, what a treat just to be able to watch them.
hmm Yeah, getting to just soak in that experience. Like I love hunting with Alyssa and with my dad and my brother, but just to be there alone in the backcountry and just sit there, eat my mountain house, watch them in the spotting scope at 400 yards. You'd zoom in and you can see them breathing and you can see their nostrils moving and them, picking leaves off of shrubs and stuff. It was a really, really special experience. It was pretty neat.
You're making me I'm gonna start a GoFundMe account so I can buy the governor's tag and go in there and hunt again.
GoFundMe.
Please help me go hunt the bike again. Please donate.
Yeah.
Uh, the yeah, I mean, so many things. My mind partially goes to logistics of, okay, those rams located there. Was there anything about their location that made you think they would or wouldn't hang out in that area? And then obviously tied to that is like, what does that immediately do for your strategy of the beginning of the hunt? Things like how close you can camp or the best vantage point, the best way to like get back in there without blowing it up, that type of thing.
Yeah, super good question. And that was like immediately on the front of my mind was like, I'm too close right now. I would have rather spotted them, like a half mile away because I was right on top of them, close enough that if the wind switched, like they could potentially even wind me and bump out of there. And you hear those sheep in that unit, like if you bump them, they'll head for the timber. And it was getting, it was still a month away from season, so it was a ways off, but I was like, I wanted to make sure and not spook them on that first trip while I was there. So I ended up packing up my camp that next morning and just heading out. I didn't try and find them the next morning, even though I had another day's worth of food and water. I was like, all right, I know where the rams are. Let's get out of here while we're ahead and not bump them into some other basin. Excuse me. Because it was really a tight little basin. And it was like sweet. It looked on the map like there should be sheep in there. Like it looked like good country. So I, even though I was a little discouraged before I walked over there, I had a pretty good idea that there could be sheep in that little, it's kind of like a tight hanging basin. It's like up off the main creek and stuff a little bit. And I was like, yeah, there could be sheep in there. So but the only place to glass into it was from about that 400-yard range. You couldn't see it from any other angle. So yeah, so as far as logistics, it ended up when we went back in there, we ended up camping probably 3/4 of a mile away, but you got to hike up like an extra steep ridge to make sure that your wind doesn't suck around and into that basin. So yeah, we would hike up from kind of around the corner from that basin and camped about 3/4 of a mile. And then you would just hike. It was about a 45-minute hike from our camp to glass into that little basin. But I mean, the sheep, they could be anywhere in there. And so it was still a little nerve-wracking to camp that close, just, because they could just as easily come around the corner and walk right through camp and you bump them out of that area. So but we paid attention to it for sure, trying to make sure that specific little basin was sacred to us.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Feel free to talk more about, you guys did this third trip, get some gear in there, or if we want to dive straight into the hunt. If I recall correctly, I mean, listeners at this point may be thinking, all right, Ram's located. They can go back in there. It sounds like these sheep aren't going to get messed with. Like this could be easy. This could be an opening day deal. But
That's what I thought
Yeah,
too.
yeah, that's not how it went down. But I don't know all the details, so I'm excited to hear more of the story.
Yeah, man, that's exactly how I felt. I was like, all right, like the odds of there are, several tags in that unit, but it's huge country, tons of folds. This is kind of an obscure little basin. And it was like, all right, like Dad's gonna come on this first hunt with us because my dad could come over from Oregon for one hunt, and we weren't sure if it was going to be the opener because most folks don't kill their sheep early September, looking at the harvest records and stuff. So we were kind of thinking maybe we would go in and treat the first trip like another scouting trip. This was before I spotted those rams. We were thinking maybe Dad will come a little later in September, but once I spotted those rams, it was like, all right, Dad's going to come on the first trip. We're going to march in there. We're going to set up in the dark in the morning, and they're going to walk out at 400 yards. It was like high hopes. But yeah, like you said, that's not the way it worked out. So yeah, our third trip in there, we just dropped off gear, and that was our first trip with the K4 packs. We got those K4 packs, and um, we had them broken in, like the lumbar support, and stuff like that. We hiked around the house and stuff and got them broken in and knew they were going to be awesome. You don't want to take, a brand new pack into the backcountry. So we knew they were going to be good. So loaded those things almost full. We have the 7,200 and with camera gear and enough food for three of us for, I think, 7 days. We took 7 days of food. We filled up those babies and packed them most of the way in there. We took them about 2/3 of the way into a good camp spot and then headed back out. And yeah, we met up with my dad. He met us at our house in Chalice, and we loaded up light packs, got the rifle and optics and stuff like that, and headed in on the 28th, and season opened on the 30th. So we left the trailhead on the 28th, hiked that 2/3 of the way into actual like sheep camp, and took a break there, stayed the night there, and my dad did awesome, man. It was like about 10 miles to that first camp, and he just trucked right in there and was like doing good. He had a light pack and stuff, but still, that's kind of a long walk. And so hiked in there on the 28th, stayed the night of the 28th in my unit, but not where I saw the sheep, and then hiked the rest of the way up into that country on the 29th and took the tough way up the ridge, trying to stay out of that basin, and got our camp set up on the evening of the 29th in time to do some glassing. But we stayed out of that basin where I had scouted the rams on the night of the 29th, just in case the wind was wrong and they happened to be in there. So it was pretty hard to not peek in there the night before the opener, but we're like, no, let's just stay out and we'll keep our distance and put all our chips in to opening day. So, but man, it's like the night before opening day is always exciting, whether it's general deer or, whatever it is, archery, antelope. I'm always fired up. Like the night before, I just get so excited. And it was next level. Like thankfully we had hiked so far and I was pretty tired that I was able to sleep. But man, it was it was pretty hard to like pause, soak in like the country, and just not be like so anxious for opening day. So um
I'm thankful we got bigger packs because we filled those things. Like there's no water up there, and so we had to
Yeah.
fill the creek at the base, and I don't remember what the climb up was,
it
1,800 feet
yeah,
or
it was
something.
about 1,800 feet from the creek to
But
where
it's
we were
just
going.
straight up and down, deadfall the whole way up there, and so it's like I'm like, oh, thank goodness we don't have to make more trips than this. So yeah, we were able to
Yeah.
get water we needed for at least a few days between the three of us, and hike it all the way up there and set up camp and
You guys would be so ashamed of us. We are not good like backpack hunters. We're like our packs were just chalked to the brim. Those 7,200 packs, you'd be like, what do these guys do? Those people are cutting handles off toothbrushes, and we had the long lens for our camera, and like
Yeah.
ridiculous. But yeah, it was definitely nice to have a good pack for sure.
Good.
Yeah, so yeah, we got in there. And so opening morning, we woke up in the dark, obviously, had our coffee. We're sitting there just like excitement level was at an 11. We thought we were going to walk around the corner and glass up some sheep, and had our breakfast, hiked up to our glassing point. That was about a 30-40 minute walk, and got set up in the dark. Got the rifle, all lined out, aimed in the right direction, set up on the bipod, and I was like ready to go. And it started getting light, and you could glass into that basin for about a half hour, and we didn't see anything, but they're so hard to see, and there's like some timber in there and stuff, and so you're starting to be like, maybe they're not in here this morning, but you're still glassing pretty intently. And Alyssa goes, I hear something behind us. And so I'm like, what is it, like, really? She's like, yeah, it's rocks rolling. It's definitely like an animal. I don't know what it is, but there's something back there. And so I'm like, well, it's probably sheep. There's like nothing else in here. So I grab my rifle and I like kind of hunker over and start sneaking. The ridge kind of rolled behind us. It wasn't very like sharp break. So I'm sneaking and looking. And from my left, coming up, walking left to right, is a dude. There's a guy, and I'm like,
Oh
oh.
no.
So yeah, I see him. I recognized him immediately. It was the guide. So the the outfitter in that area, they do fishing trips all summer, and so I had ran into their guide in the summer a couple times actually when I was hiking out from scouting. And so I'd seen him and I just wave at him. He didn't know I was sheep hunting, but like we didn't talk about it, but he probably was like, yeah, that guy's sheep hunting just because of where I was coming from and that type of thing. And yeah, I recognized him immediately. So he's coming, and then another guy, and then a guy with a rifle. So it was the guide, the hunter, and the hunter's buddy, and they had actually camped right at the bottom, right at the bottom of that hanging basin where I had scouted the rams. We ended up seeing their little like kicked out bivy spots. And so they'd been in there, he said, for 2 days prior to season actually. And so they hiked up, and man, I felt bad for myself. Like I was super down, but I honestly felt worse probably for their hunter. He was the older guy, and he was struggling. Like he was really tired, and he was so disappointed to see me. Like he couldn't even make eye contact with me. He wasn't rude, but he was just like borderline devastated to see other people in his spot when, he had paid, good money to be outfitted, and you just kind of expect to be by yourself when you're in that country. And he was so disappointed. So we had a little conversation like, where are you guys planning on going type thing? This is what I'm planning on doing. But like I said earlier, that country, it's such a big investment to like change ridge systems. You can't really realistically just be like, okay, you go this way, I'll go this way. You're just kind of committed to being in there. And so it was a pleasant, like they were friendly and we wished each other good luck, but both parties were just so disappointed to
Yeah.
see someone else in that exact spot. It was pretty pretty devastating to everyone involved.
And at the time, we
Uh,
didn't know like where they had camped, and so we're like, then it's in the back of your head, like, did they already see some sheep in here and bump them out? Or are the sheep still in here? Like, where have those guys been already? So that's also like playing in the back of your mind then at that point.
Yeah,
mhm.
all they said was we've been up here for 2 nights, and so we didn't know exactly where here was until we saw their little kicked out camp spot later. But yeah, they're like, we've been here for 2 nights, and they were clearly going to a different area. Like they were leaving that little basin and going around the corner to one about a half mile away. And so it was like, man, did they bump the Rams and like they know they're gone, so they're leaving, or did they never know about the Rams? So then you start playing kind of some mental games and you're like, well, should we stay here? Should we leave? And so to make a long story short, we chose to just commit to glassing that country. We kept our camp in the same spot. It was like, this is the only place I've seen Rams. There were nice Rams in here. And so, we're just going to commit to glassing this country for that full 6 or 7 days. And so that's what we did. It was disappointing on opening day, and then it only got more and more disappointing as you ticked off the days of just glassing and glassing. And that time of year in late August, early September, the days are so long. You get up early, go to a glassing spot, glass for 6 or 7 hours, then maybe move for the evening, glass for another 4 or 5 hours, whatever. And we didn't see anything for days until like day 5. We did see some ewes and lambs, and that was honestly a big morale booster. It was super fun. They were like running around the cliffs, and the lambs were like just like parkouring up cliffs and like jumping and butting their mom, and then they take off running. And it was super fun to watch. But yeah, that ended up being the highlight of that first trip, was just watching those ewes and lambs, because we never saw a single ram. It was pretty disappointing walking out with my dad, like knowing that he wasn't going to be there when we got our sheep. Because at that point I was like, all right, that's it. Dad came in here, he hiked his butt around, he glassed super hard, covered this country really good. It's like, if he can do that at 67, Alyssa and I will do whatever it takes. We're going to get a ram, and we'll take it back to Oregon. We'll show Dad. But it was a little disappointing that it was like, oh man, Dad's not going to get to be here, for field photos and that experience of walking up to, my Bighorn sheep. So it was a little disappointing, but at the same time, getting to experience that country with Dad and Alyssa, and you walk back to camp like at last light in that country, and you can just look out and you just see like roadless wilderness literally as far as the eye can see. And like the moon's coming up and the stars are out, and there's just a little bit of light in the western sky. It's like it was a super special experience to get to be in there with Dad and Alyssa. And I tried my best to keep a positive attitude, not get down and frustrated, and just soak in the blessing of getting to experience that country with Dad and Alyssa. But
Hmm.
yeah, so that first trip, it was unsuccessful as far as getting a ram, but it was a super cool experience to be in there.
Midway through that trip, we ended up needing more water, and so we ended up dropping down into that little basin. That was the only spot to get water,
The basin where the sheep where
yeah, it's really nerve-wracking because you're like, they could be in here. So we're like trying to make sure the wind's sucking down out of that basin before we go down in there, fill up on water, and like just get out of there. But there was sheep sign in there. Like you could see where they had bedded, where they had browsed, like, so they had definitely been in there, been living in there. But they weren't in there the whole time we were there. So we still felt like there was a chance that we could see sheep there. So yeah, that's part of the reason we opted to stay where we did.
Yeah. Yep.
And this is skipping ahead, but did you ever talk to that outfitter again, see them, know if they had any success or anything like that?
Yeah, so it's probably good to skip ahead for sake of time, but yeah. So on our next trip in, my mom stayed at our house, took care of our mules. Dad had to come back home to Oregon to work. And so it was just going to be me and Alyssa going back in on that next trip. And on the way in, we actually ran into the outfitter. The hunter had already gone out on horses. They had a horse camp kind of in the bottom. And so the hunter was gone, which I was really disappointed. I would have loved to talk to him, but we saw the outfitter, and they did get a ram during the period that we were out of that back country. We came out for 3 days and went back in without my dad, and they ended up killing a ram during that 3 day gap. And he got a really nice one, like broomed on both sides. And like I saw a picture of it, and he's just smiling ear to ear. So it was it was pretty cool because not only did that guy get his ram, but also he was gone. So it was like then it was back to being like, all right, this is our area. Like we feel pretty good that we're the only ones in here now. So it was like double exciting on the way in. Like that guy was happy and he was gone.
And we were able to ask him. At the time, they didn't have any other hunters coming in, so we're like, okay, good. Like they're out of the picture now, unless like one of the other tag holders moves into this area. We're totally alone up here, so it was a good feeling for sure.
It was. So that second trip or second hunting trip, it was just me and Alyssa, and we took enough food, I think, for 6 days again, and we headed in there, and we were pretty committed.
6 or 8,
yeah, somewhere in there. Yeah, we were pretty committed. It was like, all right, we're going back to the same spot again, which that was a whole decision-making process, whether to go somewhere totally new or go back where I had scouted those rams. And we chose to go back to where we scouted those rams, but be more open to, packing up camp, moving at least out that ridge system a little farther and looking at some new country after a couple days. So long story short, we got in there, got our camp set up in the same exact spot that we camped with my dad. And we didn't see any rams the first 2 days. And so we were starting to be like, all right, let's think about moving. We're going to go one more day into the same spot. We're going to glass it really good. And if we don't see anything, we're out of here. Like it's insanity to just keep doing the same exact thing and just glassing this empty hillside. And so it's like, if we don't see anything this day, we're moving. So we went in there, glassed from our glassing spot, and we were out of water. So we were like, all right, we're going to drop down, get some water, then go back to camp and go to some new country. So when we were dropping down into the basin that we'd already been glassing for about 3 hours, we actually jumped a young ram, and we were like so disappointed when we jumped him because we'd been glassing it and you're like set up ready to shoot that basin. And we didn't see him. He was kind of over to the left in some big boulders. And I don't know if he was bedded out of sight or if somehow we just missed him. But when we went in to get water, we jumped this ram. And that early in September, generally, there's like they're not by themselves, is what I've heard anyway. And but he was by himself, thankfully. So it was just a 2-year-old ram, definitely not a shooter. And I tried to get set up to like get a shot in case there was another ram with him. And I just couldn't get set up at the angle he was and the distance he was. And so I was super thankful that there wasn't a shooter in there because it would have been so devastating to bump him out of there ourselves after trying to glass it. So, but it was super exciting. Like we're like, all right, like we saw a ram with a tag in our pocket. Like that was kind of a little glimmer of hope. And so filled up our water and we're like, all right, we saw a ram in here. We only spooked the one. So we'll just keep our camp in the same spot and, glass here again in the morning. So packed our water back to camp and got a good night's sleep. And we ended up glassing kind of more towards the west the next morning and didn't see anything. We wanted to let the wind get really good because in the morning it would kind of suck down into that basin where we had seen the rams. So we glassed somewhere else in the morning and then moved over to our primary basin where the water was and where we had jumped that young ram and got set up on the ridge. And basically that whole basin is shootable. It's like from, the top of it's out of range at probably 650 or so, but most of the basin's shootable. So we set up and we glassed for about an hour and a half. And I'm looking through my binos on the tripod and I'm like, Alyssa, do you want to use the spotting scope on this tripod? I'm going to take a nap. So I'm offer the tripod to her and she goes, yeah, I'll take it. And then she like is a weird tone in her voice. Like, yeah, I'll take it. And then she goes, I see a ram. I think it's a shooter.
He's gonna take a nap and he's like, do you want to use this tripod? And I have the stabilizing binoculars. We just got them actually for the sheep hunt. They're awesome. And so I'm sitting there and I realize I can see legs of an animal And I'm like, well, maybe it's a deer because it can't be a sheep because we haven't seen any sheep, you know? And then I realize it's standing on this pillar of rock. And I'm like, that has to be a sheep, but its head's turned back behind it because he's sniffing around looking for a place to bed down. And I'm like, I don't want to get Jason all worked up. So I'm like, I want to make sure it's a ram before I like be like, there's a sheep, you know? And so I'm glassing it, and all of a sudden he picks up his head, and I'm like, so there's a sheep. I think it's a shooter. Like, I want to get ready. Trying to just stay calm.
Yeah, seen me get pretty jazzed up before the shot before. So she was like talking in her calming voice. It was immediately like, oh my gosh. And she was explaining where he was, and he was in a very shootable spot. And so it was like, holy smokes, like it went from 0 to 60. I was about to nap, and then there was a ram, probably a shooter in range. And so she directed me into him, with the binos, and saw him, and it's like, yep, that's one I want to shoot. It's not the biggest one I saw scouting, but it's a mature ram and just a beautiful animal. And it's like, absolutely. It was day 9 at this point of hunting. And it was like, yep, that's definitely one that I would be so excited to take. So from there, it's like, I crawl back to my rifle that was on the crest of the ridge about 5 yards behind me, crawl back there. And once you spot him, you feel like you're just right out in the wide open, like he's going to see you, even though in reality, we'd been, kind of moving around on that ridge a little bit for the last couple hours. But crawl back to the rifle, and she crawled back behind me and like got the phone scope set up and stuff because we're videoing the hunt. And so she crawls back behind me, and he bedded down. And so it went from him potentially disappearing into the timber any second to him bedding down, and it being like, oh my gosh, like, okay, we have time. Let's take a deep breath. Let's, do everything right. So I was able to kind of calm down once he bedded down. It was less of that rushed feeling and more of like, okay, let's run through like the process here. Let's get this done. So I got set up on the rifle, and again, she's my co-pilot. She's like, "Do you want to dry fire?" I'm like, "Oh, that's a good idea. Like, let's calm down and like dry fire once." And so got set up on him, and I'll never forget. I I have a bipod. I had my packable rain gear under the rear end of my rifle, and it's just dead calm. And I'll never forget settling those crosshairs on that sheep without a bullet in the chamber. And it was just like he was at 434. So for me, that's a like pretty far shot. We practiced all summer and stuff, and it's like my gun could hit a quarter at that distance. Like all my gear can do it, but it's like I just haven't grown up shooting that far at animals anyway. So, but I'll never forget looking at them through the crosshairs. It's dead steady, and I'm like, there is no way I'm missing this sheep. Like we're about to kill a sheep. So I double check, make sure one's not in the chamber, and just start pressing the trigger, and it just clicked, just perfect. It never even like left his heart. He was kind of bedded facing to the right, and he kind of had one leg kicked out. And I decided I was going to shoot him when he was bedded down. It was like less variables, like you're not rushed at all. You have all the time. So I was like, we'll just shoot him bedded down here. He had his leg kicked out, and yeah, so I was aiming just right at the top of his heart, and the crosshairs didn't even move, and the gun just click goes off. I'm like, whew, I wish that was my real shot. We'd have a sheep right now, like we'd be good to go. So I rack one in, and I didn't know I was shaking this much, but I had a GoPro set up aimed at me, like getting set up, and we watched the footage, and I rack one in, and you can see when my hand goes like from the bolt over towards the trigger, you can see my hand just shaking, like its way back towards the trigger guard. And I didn't feel it in the moment. I was like focused on my breathing and stuff, but apparently I was pretty worked up. But thankfully, I had a good rest. So rack one in, get set up again, and just kind of press the butt of the gun into that packable rain gear. The crosshairs just come up, just settle right on the heart. I'm like, take a deep breath, really focus, and just start pressing the trigger. Start pressing, and you're supposed to kind of, go through your process or your mantra or whatever, I guess. But I remember thinking as I was pressing the trigger, I was like, we're about to kill Bighorn sheep. There's no way I'm going to miss. Like, this is over. And I'm actually kind of glad I did that because it just burned into my memory that like confidence of the dead, steady crosshairs on what is probably my only bighorn sheep I'll ever kill. So press the trigger and boom, it went off and it just absolutely hit exactly where my crosshairs were. It was just a perfect shot. And he actually ended up, it it went through like one lung really good and came out below the back strap on the opposite side, but it was a little higher just because of the way he was laying. So he did stand back up, but he died like 10 yards from where he was bedded. It was just like a perfect shot, and it just like the perfect way to end an awesome sheep hunt. It was pretty special, and she got the whole thing on film, which is super fun because we were able to show my dad and my mom. We put on the computer and show them the footage and stuff like that. So I'm really thankful we got it on film too.
Man, so cool.
It was awesome. It was really a special thing, and I'll never forget it. There's no way I'll ever forget that. That was a pretty special memory.
Did you have like a big, what was the reaction? Like big adrenaline dump, excitement, like kind of calm and disbelief, you know?
That's a good question. Oh, go ahead, Alyssa.
I cried.
Yeah.
Really, just knew how much it meant to him, and so yeah, I lost it a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was relief is probably the best way to say it, because you go into that hunt with such high hopes and the anticipation, and then to not see a shooter ram for the first 8 days of the actual hunt, um, to then all of a sudden, like, there he is, get set up, shoot him, he's down. It's just kind of like it was kind of slow to hit you, and you're like soaking in the experience. You're like, I can't believe we have a bighorn sheep that we're about to walk up to together.
Yeah.
It was relief is definitely the best way to say it. And with a tinge of excitement for sure. Like relief with a little bit of fist pumping and high fiving.
Yeah, there's just like I mean, the old saying, the harder you work, right, the more enjoyable like the reward is, and the Frank is just the perfect example of that because I mean, yeah, I know those 8 days leading up to it, I was there, right? Like there's something about you just because you're just not like, no matter how optimistic you are going into day one of that hunt, after 8 days of, they're long daylight hours, you're 12, 13, 14 hours of behind binos, like you can't help but start just like doubting, and you're not
Yeah.
seeing elk, you're not seeing deer, you're just not seeing any signs of life, and then to finally see a sheep and kill it, you just feel like you pulled a needle out of a haystack.
That's exactly what it felt like. It felt like pulling a needle out of a haystack is a good way to say
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, we glass probably 14 hours a day, somewhere in
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, a couple
Yeah, I
of days.
don't doubt that. Yeah.
there. And
Yeah,
yeah, so
it's
the second ram we had seen, and we were glassing just miles and miles and miles of country. You're like, my eyes are bleeding. We haven't seen it.
yeah. Yeah, it's hard to keep an upbeat attitude as you're going through all that. That's for
It
sure.
is.
And you're fighting water. You guys had a
Yeah.
pretty good year for fires, right? You
Oh
didn't have
yeah,
to deal with too much smoke.
super fortunate. There was like no smoke. It was really good glassing conditions.
And it was funny because the night before, there's some timber over off around the corner of where these rams were. Like maybe they went into this timber, so we ended up going and glassing over there, and we heard some rocks rolling. And so we're glassing and glassing, and Jason ended up, I don't remember what happened. Oh, he didn't put enough water. It ended up being his birthday. He didn't put enough water in his mountain house. And so it was like really dry. And so it's like, birthday, we haven't seen a ram. This is towards the end of the day. We finally hear some rocks rolling, and then a mountain goat ends up coming out. And we're like, no, it's just a mountain goat, which is cool to see, but when you're looking for sheep. And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
down that day, and we ended up, that was right before we ended up walking around, and I think we had seen that little ram the next day. We're like, we'll stay here one more day, and that was when we saw that little ram. But we were really discouraged, and
It's a weird thing because you get discouraged and down, but then at the same time, what a privilege to be in that
Yep.
country, have the
Yeah.
tag, have the ability to experience that country. So you're like constantly reminding yourself, like, what a privilege to be here. But man, I wish we could find a ram too.
but the day we ended up seeing the ram that he shot, we both woke up, and Jason got up and got out of the tent and started making his coffee and stuff, and I came out and I'm like, I just feel good about today. And he's like, yeah, me too. And like all day we were just like, I just feel good about today. Like
Yep.
I don't know what it
Hmm.
was, And then yeah, we ended up seeing that ram. And so I don't know, it's just kind of funny that we both, after being
At that
down last, like few days, and we're like, this is kind of our last trip in here. Like logistically trying to find someone to take care of all the animals and stuff is hard. And yeah, and then his dad said the same thing. He woke up back in Oregon and looked up at the moon, and it was like a crescent moon in the shape of a ram's horn. He said it reminded him of a ram's horn. And he's like, oh, that's a sheep killing moon. Today's gonna be
yeah, I'm just like, I've been listening to your story and then daydreaming about my hunt, and man, I want to go back there so bad.
I know you get the itch, definitely. It's a real thing
Yeah.
for sure. Yeah.
Well, the work wasn't over. The excitement, the relief,
yeah.
the pulling the needle out of the haystack. But what takeaways? How did the pack out go, or even recovery? Like just because you shot him and he's even in sight doesn't mean it's always easy to even get to him.
Yeah, I'll try to keep this brief because I know you guys podcast is usually around an hour or so, but the pack out was a very like it was a cool part of the experience, and like you guys know with the death hike and stuff how that kind of shared suffering has a lot of value. And so yeah, we processed the sheep, it really soaked in that experience. We got to camp by that little lake, where we had been getting water and trying to stay out of there. So we had a really nice camp that last night. We were like, all right, how are we going to do this? We have all our filming gear. We have my rifle's 13 and a half pounds. We have tripods, spotting scopes, everything. And it was like warm out. So you want to get the meat out in a timely manner. And it was 15 miles to go. And so anyways, it was trying to figure out what to do. So we camped that night, soaked in the experience. We had tenderloins over a little campfire and just like really soaked it in. But in the back of your mind, the next day is going to be gnarly. So what we decided to do was we would take out the whole sheep, including life-size cape, with Alyssa being a taxidermist. She life-sized the whole thing. She skinned it all out for me, took care of the hide and stuff. So we had the life-size cape, the whole sheep, and we decided that we would just take all the sheep parts, the rifle, and the optics, and then I would go back in and pick up like our tent and stuff. So we took emergency gear, like we took a tarp and one sleeping bag, and then just sheep optics and rifle out. And it ended up being right at 210 pounds worth of stuff on that first trip. Alyssa carried 90 and I carried 99 actually. So 200 and whatever that is, I guess. I did my math wrong. I shouldn't do public math, but she had a 90-pound pack and I had a 99-pound pack. And we hiked it out that next day. And we took the emergency gear just in case, like we had a cramp issue or strained something, or God forbid, roll an ankle or something like that. We did take the one sleeping bag and tarp just in case we needed to stay a night on the way out. But we made it the 15 miles out in one pull. I think it ended up taking right at 11 hours, and it was honestly pretty painful. Even though 99 pounds isn't that heavy of a pack, it's just like the repetitive, like just step after step after step. It ended up being pretty painful, but we would take breaks and really try and soak it in, because the whole time I'd been scouting, I was just like anticipating hiking out this trail with a bighorn sheep on my pack. And so we would sit down and talk about how bad our legs hurt, and then we would talk about how awesome it is that we have a sheep in our pack, and try to soak in that suffering for that last day coming out of sheep country.
we try to go like a mile at a time. We go for a while and be like, all right, this has got to be a mile. And look down, it's like, 0.7 or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, darn it. Yeah, we would set little goals for ourselves. Like, all right, we got to go a mile before we take our next break, and plop
Yeah.
down. It was like barely over half a mile. So we were inching our way out of there, but at the same time, we were trying to really soak in that pain, because for us, it's always been like the heavy pack out is such a big part of the memory. And I don't know if it's how I was raised or like competition with my brother. It's always like just having a heavy pack and embracing that suffering. And then the like reward of getting to the truck at the trailhead and like dropping the tailgate. It's just like, it's such a big part of the memory for us. So it was kind of the pinnacle of like tough pack outs thus far in my life. It was pretty cool to get to do that with Alyssa. And thank goodness, like she is pretty tough, and could carry a bunch of gear. So it was a big part of the experience.
That's amazing.
It was pretty cool. Yeah, getting to the trailhead is an experience that I'll never forget. Also, we got to the trailhead, and actually, unfortunately, we drive a Subaru, so it doesn't sound quite as cool as dropping the tailgate. But
I lifted the hatchback and sat
yeah,
down.
hopping up
Yeah.
that hatchback at the trailhead, man, and then sitting on the bumper, it's like, it feels so good.
That's rad. Oh, good
Uh,
stuff.
Yeah, it was
awesome.
awesome. The whole experience, so it couldn't have been any better, honestly. Actually, the only way it could have been better is if Dad had been there. But it's like you don't really want to kill a sheep on opening day of your only sheep hunt. And so it's like the whole experience from scouting and not seeing anything to being like, 15 miles in there and just being a really tough physical hunt to making a good shot at the moment of truth, the hard pack out. It was just the absolute pinnacle, and just a huge blessing to have that experience with Dad and with Alyssa. It was really cool.
Yeah, we were chatting a little bit before I hit record. You were asking me questions about my sheep hunt and hadn't heard the whole story, but it was very similar. Went into that hunt with a ram that my buddy Mark, who's the guide, had scouted, and there's like this very real possibility of opening day, we're just going to shoot a ram, and that didn't happen. And then
Yeah,
there was a lot of struggle and setbacks, and just discouragement. And then ultimately on day 9, it's funny, similar story,
yeah,
15-mile
yeah.
pack out, all the same stuff, but it's like, man, I'm so glad it didn't happen. Like the quote unquote easy way of like, oh yeah, a ram, opening day, shot it, hunt's over, it just wouldn't be the
Exactly. There's
same.
so much more depth to it. That's funny. Yeah, yours was day 9 also.
Yeah.
It's cool.
Yeah, his ram ended up dying right on it wouldn't have been a bad cliff for it to go off of, but right on the edge. And so it's like walking through those rim rocks and then just peering down and seeing that sheep on that ledge down there was like, oh my gosh, this is real life. Like this actually happened. And he just had the coolest black horns from living in that burn. And I remember he had more mass than I thought he did when he shot him, looking at him through, the spotting scope. And so it's like just walking up on him and actually feeling like how heavy their heads are. You hear about how heavy their horns are and how dense they are, and just being able to hold those in your hand and then like eating tenderloins over the fire. And you hear about sheep being some of the best meat, and it really is. It was so good. And just that part for me was like the absolute like
Yeah.
top for this trip. Awesome.
Yeah. Well, Alyssa, what's the taxidermy bill for Jason?
I don't know. I'll have to figure it out. Let's see. What do I need done around?
Or chickens or another mule.
Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny because when we came out the first time, I was like, I'm never putting in for this tag. Like maybe a different one, but probably not the unit we
Mm.
ended up drawing. And then as we're like packing out the sheep, it was like, oh, I might put in for this one. And then, 2 days after you're done packed out, I'm like, yeah, I'm putting in for that next year.
Right. Yeah. We're definitely doing that
Yeah,
again.
yeah. That's yeah, so awesome.
It was a huge blessing, just an awesome experience.
Alyssa, I did want to ask, like, you're doing your own taxidermy work now, is that right? Because you mentioned like doing the apprenticeships and all that, but you have your own business going in Chalice?
Yeah, so I kind of did my own on the side for the last few years, but I worked for a shop as a full taxidermist. And so just in March, I transitioned over to doing all my own stuff. So we're able to kind of have a break because March isn't a great time for bringing in taxidermy work. So over the summer, we were able to enjoy our mules and just kind of, catch up and take a break really from taxidermy because I was feeling a little burnout from doing so much work for that other shop. And so yeah, then this fall we started taking in stuff and I didn't really advertise and ended up getting a few outfitters that ended up bringing us quite a bit of stuff. So it was awesome.
Cool. Well, you may not want to advertise, but if you do want to share your
Yeah,
business, if you
so
are open to bringing on stuff.
I have a Chalice Taxidermy, so Challis, and we're in Chalice, Idaho. And yeah, I don't do birds or fish, but any mammal work, that's primarily what I do. And I enjoy doing like custom life sizes or things like that. That's what I did for the shop that I worked for the last 4 years and kind of what I learned apprenticing as well. So that's definitely one thing I love to do is those custom life size pieces and just something unique. So
Yeah.
I just jumped on Instagram and searched up that freaking buffalo you have. That thing looks amazing.
Thank you.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah,
you.
that is badass. Wow.
So the shop I worked for, we would flush and tan our own stuff, and so part of the tanning process is you have to thin down the hide with this like big blade, big rotating blade. And lifting that life-size buffalo hide and like running it against that blade is a serious workout. It took two people just to lift the thing onto the table, and yeah, so that was quite the project. And that one actually ended up going to China. A guy from China had flown out, shot that buffalo, and so
Oh
that one,
wow.
yeah. But
That's wild. Very cool, guys. Well, thank you for sharing the story. It's such a special hunt, and it's just fun to be able to hear about it. So I'm glad that you reached out to let us know, and we were able to make it happen. And yeah, just even I know for Steve and I personally, we enjoy these conversations and stories, and I know a bunch of listeners will as well. So thank you.
Thank you
yeah,
for having us on. It's super fun to relive it and get to talk about it, and just brings a smile to my face just remembering the experience. So thanks for having us on. We really appreciate it. It's been super fun.
and thanks for your packs, because packing out 90 pounds of sheep,
Yeah.
man, that would have destroyed me if I would have had a bad fitting pack. So yeah, I'm thankful to have something that fits well and is comfortable, because we needed it for sure.
I did want to mention too, almost forgot, you mentioned earlier briefly, you guys do some content like videos and stuff like that. So I did want to just let listeners know about that. If you want to, obviously I can put a link in the show description, but is there like a channel name or like anything to easily find that?
Yeah, everything we're doing now, we're really shifting our focus to YouTube. And so our YouTube that we're putting everything on now is just MTN built, mountain built, but just MTN built. And
Cool.
we're learning as we go. Thankfully, Alyssa's good at the editing and stuff, but we decided to just make the leap, buy the gear, and learn as we go, and just start, because there's a little bit of fear starting that kind of thing, and imposter
Mhm.
syndrome and stuff. And so we're learning as we go, and we're really enjoying the process, and we're going to try to get a little better with every video we have coming out. So we have our next ones out are going to be a Western whitetail hunt, and then the sheep hunt will probably be out late December probably.
Perfect. Well, make sure and let us know when that happens. And in the meantime, we'll have a link to the channel in the description.
Awesome.
Definitely,
That
thank you.
sounds great. Thank you guys. It's been awesome talking to you guys.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, what a special story and experience. That film that we mentioned would be coming is now live, since it's been a little bit since we recorded this conversation. So be sure to check out the link in the show description if you actually want to watch this hunt unfold or see some photos as well. Thanks as always for tuning in. You'll also find links in the show description to get in contact with us if you have any questions, comments, feedback, or suggestions. And if you are enjoying the show, it would help us tremendously if you could leave a rating or a review in whatever podcast app you're using, or just share the show with a friend. Thanks for doing that, and we'll talk to you soon.